Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and the question is Islam a religion of peace? It's like asking, is a rainbow yellow? Parts of it are, but the rainbow itself is not. Like all religions, Islam is a religion of contradictions. But I want to start by making an important distinction between Muslims and Islam. I'm sure we'll hear the word Islamophobia a lot here tonight. In fact, we've already heard it from behind the curtain there. I reject and challenge the use of the word Islamophobia. It conflates two different concepts, which is bigotry against Muslims, which is a bad thing, and criticism of Islam, which is a good thing. And it phrases it using language that suggests that criticism of Islam involves having some sort of mental illness. We should be very conscious of that distinction. We should ask, in terms of Muslims, are Muslims peaceful? Of course they are. It's like asking, are human beings peaceful? Most Muslims are peaceful. Some Muslims are not, like any group of people. We should give Muslims the respect of treating them as individuals, not as a monolithic bloc that are described as either peaceful or violent. Most Muslims are ordinary Sunnis or Shias or Ahmadis or any other variation of Islam, whose priority is to just live normal lives. Most Muslims piously follow their religion. Some in the West don't, but still consider themselves to be cultural Muslims despite drinking alcohol and not wearing veils. Some Muslims are persecuted. Ahmadiyas, women, gay Muslims, or various other reformist Muslims. Some Muslims are leaders of Islamist regimes that impose Sharia by force on other Muslims and on minority religions and atheists. And that includes the Wahhabi Sunni regime in Saudi Arabia, with its religious police and its law that defines atheism as terrorism. And it includes the Shia regime in Iran, where a psychotherapist was executed in 2014 for publishing innovative interpretations of the Quran. Some Muslims are members of international terrorist groups, from the Shia Hezbollah in Lebanon, with its aim of obliterating Israel, to the Sunni ISIS, who promote their supposed caliphate by murdering concertgoers in Paris. Some Muslims are religiously motivated murderers. In Bangladesh, 3 secular bloggers and a publisher were hacked to death last year. In Pakistan, where Christian woman Asia Bibi is facing execution for allegedly blaspheming against the Prophet Muhammad, 2 politicians who spoke out in her favour, one a Muslim, one a Christian, were murdered. One murdered by his own bodyguard. But we shouldn't blame all Muslims for the injustices perpetrated by Islamist regimes or by Islamist terrorist groups. Indeed, we should recognise that most of the victims of Islamist regimes and Islamist terrorist groups are Muslims. We should oppose prejudice and discrimination and bigotry and violence against Muslims. And we should treat Muslims with the same respect as people as we accord to ourselves. But independently of treating Muslims as individuals, there's the question, which we're discussing tonight: is Islam a religion of peace? And I suggest that the answer is no, unless you ignore the evidence of reality. Now, religions are typically good at ignoring the evidence of reality, but I suggest tonight here we should focus on reality. Unlike religions in secular democracies, Islam, and particularly evident and manifest in Islamist states, is not merely a religion in the way that we typically know religions in the Western world. Islam is an integrated religious, political, judicial and military form of social governance. And you can't disentangle the religious and political and judicial and military elements of those and say that is Islam, because it is the combination of all of those that constitute Islam. Islam is a way of life, not merely the type of religion that we consider to be a religion in Western societies. And therefore Islam cannot be peaceful, because as a system of social governance, at a minimum, it has to be able to use violence when it needs to in order to protect Islamic values, just as Western secular liberal democracies have to be able to use violence at times in order to protect the values of Western liberal social democracy. But there's a distinction, which is that the laws of secular liberal democracy have evolved over the centuries to gradually reflect more nuanced variations of democracy, of freedom of conscience, of equality before the law, of freedom from discrimination. But the values of Islam and Sharia are shackled to the Quran and the Hadith, which are documents that were written up to 13 centuries ago, and any proposed changes to the way that Islam is governed have to be made consistent with those texts that reflect the values of a more violent and undemocratic era. Now, like any religious text, the Quran conveys a complex set of values. Parts of it were written when Muhammad and his followers were in Mecca and were being persecuted, and parts of it were written when Muhammad and his followers were in Medina and were governing. And unsurprisingly, you'll find much more peaceful and equality-based values when they were being persecuted than in the passages that were written when they were governing. The Quran promotes many good things. It promotes, don't lie, be good to your parents, be good to the poor, set slaves free, don't oppress people, don't have compulsion in religion. These are all very good moral values. But in the same book, you also have passages suggesting that a man can beat his wife in certain circumstances, suggesting that you should cut off the hands of thieves, suggesting that you should kill disbelievers and fight non-Muslims until they are in a state of subjection. Now, you can argue that these verses mean different things in different contexts. You can argue that you have to read them in the original Arabic. You can make any number of arguments. But the difficulty with that is that Islam has no central theological authority, which means that ISIS or Al-Qaeda can argue that their interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith is the correct one and yours is the wrong one, just as easily as you can the other way around. And it's worth noting here that the theologically influential Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which issues fatwas on various issues, has specifically issued a statement refusing to declare ISIS to be apostates. And I think that's significant. I think that anybody who suggests that Islam is a religion of peace should at a minimum be able to say that ISIS are apostates. But the reality of history has shown us that, and it's not just in Islam at this, but when you have a book with these contradictory meanings, and when people are under the impression that the creator of the universe is telling them to act in accordance with them, the reality of history is that Islam has consistently led to violence. From the massacres of the Jews in the Battle of the Trench in Medina, which, by the way, was under Muhammad. This isn't people misinterpreting. This is when Muhammad was in charge. Through centuries of atrocities against Hindus in India, to today when Islamist states would persecute people for doing or saying or believing the wrong thing. The IHEU has just published its 2015 Freedom of Thought Report, which is an annual global report on discrimination. And the countries with the best records are all secular, with separation of church and state. 4/5 of the countries with the gravest violations are Islamic or mostly Islamic. They include Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, United Arab Emirates, Yemen, all in Western Asia, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Iran, Maldives and Pakistan in Southern Asia, Brunei, Indonesia and Malaysia in Southern Asia, and Comoros, Egypt, Gambia, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco and Sudan in Africa. So if you ask me, are Muslims peaceful people, I would say yes, they're as peaceful as anybody else. If you ask me, is Islam a religion of peace? Clearly it is not, unless you ignore the evidence of reality. It is an ideology imposed by force and unable to adjust to the evolving human rights standards that Western societies are evolving towards, not perfectly, but certainly far more so than Islam has. So if you believe that freedom of conscience and equality before the law and freedom from discrimination are more peaceful than hanging blasphemers or flogging adulterers or cutting the hands off thieves, I ask you to support the motion. Thank you.